Honestly, why is she still alive? That's the question my daughter-in-law asked. Her voice, sharp and cold as ice, cut right through the cheerful noise of a summer barbecue. My son, my only child, answered her with a little chuckle, like they were sharing a private joke. They thought I couldn't hear them, sittin' pretty with their plans. Well, I'm Josephine Wallace, Joe to my friends, and I was about to give them their answer. I'd make them pay for every last word, not with my tears, but with the very inheritance they were so hungry for. So pull up a chair and listen to my story. It's the story of how a forgotten old woman took back everything. The sun hadn't even climbed over the maple trees in Sycamore Creek, Ohio, but I was already in my kitchen, the coffee maker humming like an old friend. This house, built by my Samuel's own two hands, had a language all its own. The creak of the third step on the stairs, the groan of the pipes when I turned on the faucet, the little whistle of wind through the window frame Samuel always said he'd fix next spring. Well, he's been gone 7 springs now, and I'd gotten used to those unfinished promises. At 72, my body was a lot like this old house, full of its own creaks and complaints. My back ached on damp mornings, and my right knee could predict a storm better than the fella on the local news. But I was my own woman. I drove myself to the grocery store, mowed my own lawn. My independence was the last warm blanket I had, and I held on to it for dear life. It was holding on so tight that made me reluctantly sign that medical power of attorney a few years back. Kevin, my son, sat right here at this kitchen table, his voice all reasonable and caring. "It's just a precaution, Mom," he'd said. "Just in case something happens, I can make sure you get the best care. It doesn't change a thing day to day." Lori, my daughter-in-law, sat next to him nodding like a bobblehead, a smile on her face that never quite reached her eyes. "That's right, Mama Joe. In this day and age, it's always better to have your ducks in a row." So I signed. I signed because I didn't want them to think I was being stubborn, that I didn't trust my own boy. I tucked my copy of that paper away in the filing cabinet next to Kevin's birth certificate and Samuel's death certificate and put it out of my mind. I figured it would just be a piece of paper collecting dust, a precaution we'd never need. Boy, was I wrong. The barbecue in July was Lori's idea. She loved any excuse to show off her new house, her perfectly manicured lawn, and her to-die-for recipes. I didn't want to go, but I had to, for Kevin, and for Grace, my 16-year-old granddaughter, the only one in that family who still looked at me with pure, honest-to-goodness love in her eyes. I spent the whole morning baking an apple pie, the kind Kevin used to love as a boy, with a flaky crust and a filling spiced just right with cinnamon and nutmeg. I showed up with it still warm in my hands. Their backyard was a wall of loud music and fake laughter. I felt invisible. People drifted past me with vague little nods. Kevin gave me a quick, hurried hug that smelled faintly of beer. "Glad you could make it, Mom." Then he was gone, pulled back into some joke with his buddies. I set my pie on the table next to 3 different salads Lori had picked up from the supermarket. Nobody touched it. I was standing behind the rose trellis, planning my escape, when I heard it. Lori's voice, sharp as a knife, not even bothering to keep it down. "For God's sake, Kevin, look at your mother, just skulking in the corner. You need to talk to her about moving somewhere. She's going to be a burden sooner or later." I held my breath, my heart hammering against my ribs. I waited for Kevin to defend me. I waited for my son, the little boy I'd rocked through fevers and nightmares, to say, "Don't talk about my mother that way." But instead, I heard a laugh. A soft, complicit laugh. And then, my own son's voice, trying to be funny to please his wife, but every word was a hammer blow to my heart. You make her sound like some old cat on its last legs, he said, still chuckling. And then came the final blow, the curse that would haunt me for weeks, straight from my daughter-in-law's mouth. Her voice was full of impatience, like she was talking about a piece of old furniture that needed to be hauled to the dump. Honestly, why is she still alive? My world just shattered. I didn't say goodbye. I got in my car, and I remember looking down and seeing my hands trembling on the steering wheel. That apple pie, my little symbol of a mother's love, was still sitting there on that table, forgotten, just like me. The next few weeks were a blur. Lori's question and Kevin's laughter became my constant companions. They whispered to me in the morning when I looked at my wrinkled face in the mirror. A burden, an old cat on its last legs. Why is she still alive? They sat with me at the dinner table, making my food taste like ash. They crept into my dreams and turned them into nightmares of being alone and thrown away. I couldn't sleep, and the exhaustion during the day made me forgetful and clumsy. It was a drizzly Tuesday afternoon. I was trying to get an old soup tureen off the top shelf in the pantry, one Samuel had put up there years ago. I reached for it, standing on my tiptoes on the little step stool. For just a second, my mind drifted, and my foot slipped off the edge. There was no time to scream, just a sudden, lurching feeling of being airborne, and then a sickening, dry crack as my hip met the tiled floor. The pain was a white-hot flash. It swallowed every thought, every sound. I just lay there, crumpled on the cold kitchen floor, helpless. My phone was on the counter, an arm's length away, but it might as well have been on the other side of the ocean. How long I lay there, I don't know. Time gets twisted up when you're in that much pain. Finally, with a strength I didn't know I had, I dragged myself to the counter and pulled the phone down. The 911 operator's voice was so calm and distant, a strange counterpoint to the chaos inside me. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and fear. The fluorescent lights were cold and unforgiving, leaving no corner for privacy or dignity. The doctor's diagnosis was blunt, a fractured femoral neck. I needed surgery. Kevin and Lori arrived soon after, their faces plastered with masks of concern. Lori rushed to my bedside and grabbed my hand. Hers was ice cold. "Oh, Mama Joe, you scared us half to death. Are you okay? Does it hurt terribly?" Her voice was dripping with a syrupy sweetness that felt like poison. Kevin stood at the foot of the bed, looking helpless. "The doctor says you need an operation, Mom, but don't you worry, everything's going to be just fine." I was too tired and in too much pain to see the performance for what it was. I clung to their presence, to their empty words, because when you're at your weakest, you'll cling to just about anything. The surgery went well, or so they told me, but it was followed by long days of pain and dependency. I couldn't sit up by myself. I couldn't even use the bathroom on my own. I had become exactly what Lori wanted, a burden. On the third night after the surgery, when the heavy painkillers were just starting to wear off, I drifted into a light, hazy sleep. I was pulled back to a half-awake state by whispers from just outside my room, where the door had been left ajar. It was Lori's voice, crisp and businesslike. "You see, Kevin, this could be a blessing in disguise. She obviously can't live alone anymore, and we can't take care of her. I don't have the time, and we sure don't have the room." There was a pause, and then Kevin's voice, weak and hesitant. "I know, but what do we do?" "I've already looked into it," Lori went on, and I could hear the triumph in her voice. "There's a place called Maple Grove Nursing Home way out in New Albany. It's very affordable. They have nurses on staff. It's the best place for her." New Albany, over an hour's drive away. A place none of my friends would ever be able to visit. A place to be forgotten. "But that's so far," Kevin said, a final tiny spark of protest. Far is quiet, Kevin, Lori shot back, her voice turning hard. And once she's settled in there, we can put the house on the market. You know how good the real estate market is right now. We could use that money to invest in that rental property we've been talking about. This is our chance. I lay there, frozen in my bed, but my mind was screaming. That power of attorney. To make sure you get the best care. Kevin's words echoed in my head, a cruel, mocking joke. They weren't finding the best place for me. They were finding a cheap prison. They weren't worried about my well-being. They were hungry for my house, my legacy, my life. That comment at the barbecue, it wasn't just a slip of the tongue. It was a wish. And now they were using my own signature, my own trust to make that wish come true. The pain in my hip was nothing compared to the agony of betrayal that was tearing my soul apart. I closed my eyes, letting the darkness of the hospital room wash over me. But in that darkness, a tiny flame began to flicker. The physical pain kept my mind sharp. I lay there, listening to the steady breathing of the patient in the next bed, and I made a plan. I waited until 3 in the morning, the witching hour, when the halls are quiet and the nurses are worn out. Carefully, moving inch by painful inch, I reached my good arm toward the bedside table. My fingers trembled as they stretched for the phone. Every movement was torture, but the image of Maple Grove, a place I'd never seen but could picture perfectly with its peeling beige walls and the smell of disinfectant mixed with despair, drove me on. Finally, my fingers closed around it. The screen lit up, casting a cold glow on my face. I fumbled through my contacts, my old fingers clumsy on the screen, until I found the name. Beatrice B. Miller. Bea wasn't just my friend. She was a retired head nurse, a woman who could stop a bar fight with a single raised eyebrow and knew the healthcare system inside and out. I hit the call button. It rang twice before a sleepy but sharp voice answered. "Joe, what is it? Are you all right?" "Bea," I whispered, my voice raspy. "I need your help. I'm in a world of trouble." I told her everything. The comment at the barbecue, the fall, and the conversation I'd just overheard. My voice was cold and steady, like I was giving a field report. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Them bastards," she finally said, her voice completely devoid of sympathy for Kevin and Lori. "All right, Joe, listen to me. Don't you sign a single thing. Don't agree to anything. You play the part. Be weak, tired, in pain. Stall them. You understand me? Buy me some time." "I understand," I said. "Tomorrow morning I'm making some calls. I know people. We need a lawyer, one who specializes in elder rights. You just rest. I'll handle the rest." When I hung up, a fragile sense of relief washed over me. I wasn't alone in this fight anymore. I had Bea, and that made all the difference. The next day, the show began. When Kevin and Lori came in that morning, I was ready. My eyes were half closed, my breathing shallow and weak. "Mom, how are you feeling?" Kevin asked, his tone dripping with fake concern. I pried my eyes open with great effort. Pain, so much pain, honey, and so tired. Lori placed a cheap bouquet of carnations on the table. "We know you're tired, Mama Joe. That's why we've been doing some thinking. After you're discharged, you can't go right home. You need professional care." I looked at her, trying to keep my gaze cloudy and unfocused. "Care? Where?" "It's a wonderful place called Maple Grove," Lori said, her smile looking forced under the hospital lights. "It's so quiet and peaceful. The nurses there will look after you 24/7. You'll have time to really heal." "Quiet?" I repeated, as if the word were foreign to me. "But my house?" "Don't you worry about the house. Kevin jumped in, a little too quickly. Grace can stop by and water the plants. The most important thing right now is your health. He said, my health, but his eyes lit up with greed at the thought of the house. I could see it plain as day. Let me think on it, I whispered, and closed my eyes again, pretending to be exhausted. They exchanged a look of frustration, but didn't push. My act was working. They thought I was too weak to fight back, that it was only a matter of time. The next few days were a master class in psychological warfare. They brought brochures for Maple Grove, glossy photos of smiling seniors playing checkers and strolling through gardens. But I saw what wasn't in the pictures: the long, empty hallways, the cramped rooms, the loneliness. With every visit, I played the part of the frail, confused old woman. I asked the same questions over and over. I pretended to doze off mid-conversation. I'd complain about a sudden spike of pain to change the subject. Meanwhile, on the outside, Bea was a whirlwind of action. She'd call me every night after the nurses had made their rounds with a progress report. "I've got the lawyer," she said on the second night. "Her name is Sarah Jenkins. She's young, but she's a real bulldog. Specializes in cases just like this. She says your power of attorney lets Kevin make decisions, but it doesn't let him act against your best interests. Shoving you in some cut-rate facility an hour away so he can sell your house is definitely not in your best interests." "When can she get here?" I asked. "She's working on it. Day after tomorrow, maybe. You just hang in there, Joe." One afternoon, while Kevin and Lori were busy meeting with the hospital's social worker, which was just code for pushing their plan forward, Grace came by herself. She slipped into the room carrying a book and a bag of homemade cookies. "Grandma," she said softly, sitting in the chair by my bed, "how are you really feeling?" I looked into her clear, honest eyes. Grace had Samuel's eyes. In front of her, I couldn't keep up the act. "I'm tired, sweetheart," I told her, the truth of it heavy in my voice. "But not from the fall." She put her hand on mine. It was so warm. "What are Mom and Dad doing, Grandma? I saw those brochures. Maple Grove. I looked it up online. The reviews are awful." I took a deep breath. "They think I can't take care of myself anymore. They want to put me there." "So they can sell your house," Grace said it flat out. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. That girl was sharper than she let on. I nodded, and the tears finally came, the first real tears since the fall. Grace squeezed my hand tighter. "No, I won't let them. You belong at home, at Grandpa's house. I'll help you. I can come stay with you after school." "Oh, Grace," I sobbed, "your parents would never allow that." "Then we'll have to fight," she said, her young voice filled with a steel I hadn't heard before. "You're not alone in this. You've got me. And you've got your friend, right, Bea? I saw her talking to a nurse in the hallway a minute ago. She looked scary." I let out a watery laugh. "Yes, sweetie, she is very scary. And thank God for that." Grace's presence, her unquestioning loyalty, lit a fire in me. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for Grace, for Samuel's memory, and for the right to live out my last years in dignity. The next day, Bea called that morning. "Sarah's on her way. She'll be there at 2:00. Hold down the fort until then." But Kevin and Lori didn't give me that long. They arrived at 1, and they weren't alone. With them was a woman in a cheap business suit with a wide smile and cold, calculating eyes. "Mama Joe, this is Miss Miller," Lori chirped. "She's the admissions director from Maple Grove. She's just here to help you get some paperwork squared away." This Miss Miller placed a thick file of papers on the rolling table in front of me. "Hello, Mrs. Wallace. We're so looking forward to welcoming you to the Maple Grove family. This is just a bit of standard procedure." I stared at the papers. The words swam before my eyes. Contracts, clauses, conditions, a prison sentence written in legalese. I need time to read this," I said, my voice trembling. This time, the tremor was real. Oh, it's nothing complicated, Miss Miller said smoothly. Mainly insurance information and treatment consents. Your son, as your power of attorney, can sign most of it, but we always like to have the resident's signature as well, just to show willing consent. Kevin stepped forward. Come on, Mom, just sign it. We all want what's best for you. No, I said, my voice louder than I intended. I want to read it. Lori's face tightened with impatience. Oh, for heaven's sake, stop being so difficult. We're only trying to help you. Is this helping? I asked, looking my son dead in the eye. Shoving your mother in a strange place so you can sell her house? Is that the best care you promised me? Kevin froze, the color draining from his face. He never thought I knew. Just then, the door to the room swung open. A young woman in a perfectly tailored suit strode in with the confidence of a 4-star general. Right behind her was Bea, her face set like granite. Pardon the interruption, the young woman said, her voice crisp and clear. I'm Sarah Jenkins, Josephine Wallace's attorney. Kevin and Lori whipped around, their faces a picture of pure shock. Miss Miller just looked confused. Attorney? Lori stammered. Why would you need an attorney? Sarah Jenkins walked directly to my bedside, placing a protective hand on my shoulder. She looked straight at Kevin. Mr. Wallace, I'm here to inform you that my client, Mrs. Josephine Wallace, is hereby and with immediate effect revoking the medical power of attorney granted to you. A stunned silence fell over the room. The steady beep of the heart monitor suddenly sounded deafening. Kevin looked like he'd been struck by lightning. Revoking? But why? I'm her son. A son, Sarah said, her voice dropping to a near-Arctic temperature, who appears to be abusing that authority to place his mother in an unsuitable facility for the purpose of liquidating her assets. We have evidence, Mr. Wallace, and we are fully prepared to take this matter to court. Lori couldn't hold it in any longer. Evidence? What evidence? This old woman is confused. She fell and hit her head. She doesn't know what she's saying. You shut your mouth. Bea's voice boomed, and Lori actually flinched back a step. Kevin, finally finding his voice, took a step forward, his face a pathetic mess of confusion and self-pity. Mom, how could you do this to me? I'm your son. Everything I've done is for you. The doctors said you need care. What's best for her, or what's best for your wallet, Kevin? Bea snarled, her voice low and dangerous. She moved to stand between them and my bed. I heard you, Lori, at that barbecue. Why is she still alive? And I heard you laugh, Kevin. Did you really think we wouldn't figure it out? The words hit them like a physical blow. Lori's mouth hung open, speechless, while Kevin shrank back as if he'd been slapped. That was just a joke, he stammered, his eyes darting around the room. You took it the wrong way. We took it exactly the right way, Sarah Jenkins cut in, her tone final and sharp. Mr. Wallace, what's best does not involve isolating my client from her support system and making plans to sell her assets without her consent. Your actions have all the hallmarks of elder abuse. If Mrs. Wallace chooses, we have more than enough grounds for a lawsuit. The word lawsuit hung in the air. Miss Miller, the admissions director, was already gathering her papers, muttering a faint apology and scurrying out of the room like a rat leaving a sinking ship. The argument had reached its peak. Abuse? Lori shrieked, her fear now boiling over into rage. We've worried about her for years. She has no idea how lucky she is. She's just a selfish, bitter old woman. The shouting had attracted attention. The half-closed door was now pushed open. A few nurses, an orderly, even another patient in a blue gown were peering in. Kevin and Lori's little play of filial piety was no longer a private performance. It was out in the open, under the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital hallway for all the world to see. Kevin saw it. He grabbed his wife's arm. "Lori, that's enough. Let's go." His face was flushed with shame. Lori shook him off, but she knew the jig was up. She shot one last look at me, all pretense gone, her eyes filled with pure, unadulterated hatred. "Fine, have it your way, but don't come calling us the next time you take a tumble. You've made your bed." Then she spun around and stormed out of the room. Kevin, unable to look me or Bea or anyone else in the eye, scurried after her. The door swung shut, cutting off the noise, and then there was silence. In the middle of the chaos, I lay perfectly still in my bed. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. Sarah Jenkins pulled a chair up to my bed, her presence radiating a calm, efficient energy. Bea stood at the foot of the bed, her arms crossed, looking for all the world like a sentinel guarding her queen. "Now," Sarah said softly, "let's make this official." She placed a document on the rolling table and handed me a pen. "This is a revocation of Kevin Wallace's power of attorney. Your signature will need to be notarized by a hospital official." She glanced toward the door, where an older nurse was waiting with a sympathetic look. "And we have one standing by." I took the pen. It felt heavy in my hand. I looked down at the crisp, typewritten words. "I, Josephine Wallace, do hereby revoke any and all powers previously granted to Kevin Wallace." I signed my name. My handwriting was a little shaky, not from weakness, but from the weight of the moment. It was more than a signature. It was a declaration of independence. It was the severing of a rope I had willingly handed to my own executioners. "Next," Sarah said after the paperwork was properly witnessed, "we need to appoint a new power of attorney, someone you trust implicitly." I didn't have to think twice. I looked at Bea. "Bea, would you be willing?" Bea stepped forward, her eyes a little misty, but her voice was rock steady. "It would be an honor, Joe." When the new papers were signed, a weight I'd been carrying for years seemed to lift from my shoulders. I was no longer a helpless patient waiting for a fate decided by others. I was in the driver's seat again. "So, what's the plan now?" Sarah asked. "We could pursue a suit for breach of fiduciary duty and emotional distress." I shook my head. No, taking them to court would just drag out the misery. That's not the kind of revenge I want. I have a better idea. I never spoke directly to Kevin or Lori again. All communication went through Sarah. They tried calling, sending texts that swung between syrupy and threatening. I blocked their numbers. My silence was my most powerful weapon. With Bea's help, I found an excellent rehabilitation center right there in Sycamore Creek. It wasn't cheap, but it was bright and clean, and the therapists treated me with respect. Grace visited me every day after school, bringing books and stories from her classes. She was the best medicine I could have asked for. During the weeks I spent learning to walk again, to climb stairs, to trust my own body, I was also working with Sarah to rebuild my future on paper. One afternoon, she brought the final draft of my new will to the rehab center. We sat in a sunny corner of the common room. I read every line carefully. My house, the soul of my life with Samuel, was not to be sold. It would be placed in a trust. The bulk of my estate, including the proceeds from the eventual sale of the house after my death, would go into that trust. The sole beneficiary of the trust was Grace Wallace. This trust, I had explained to Sarah, is to be managed by Bea Miller until Grace turns 25. The money is to be used only for her college education, medical expenses, and a little nest egg if she wants to start a business. I want her to have the freedom I never did. "And Kevin Wallace?" Sarah had asked. "Kevin," I said, taking a deep breath, "will receive $1. Sarah raised an eyebrow. $1? Are you sure? Legally speaking, leaving a token amount like that is a more powerful statement than leaving nothing. It shows it was a deliberate choice, not an oversight." "I know," I replied. "I want him to know he was considered, and that is the full value of his concern for me." My revenge wasn't a hot-blooded, angry act. It was cool and calculated. It was a lesson in cause and effect. You wanted me gone? Then I will be gone from your financial future. You wanted control over my life? Then I will take back that control. I wasn't taking anything from them they hadn't already tried to steal. I was simply closing the door to a treasure they had taken for granted. The day I was discharged and came home was one of the best of my life. Bea drove me. As the car turned onto my street, I saw it. My house. It looked as solid and steadfast as ever. Grace was there waiting. She had cleaned the house from top to bottom and put a vase of wildflowers on the kitchen table. Taped to the front door was a crooked, hand-drawn banner. Welcome home, Grandma. Walking across my own threshold, even with a cane, I felt like a queen returning to her kingdom. Every familiar creak of the floorboards, every shaft of light through the windows was a welcome. I had fought for this place, and I had won. The months that followed were a slow, steady process of healing, body and soul. The cane stayed with me, but every day I walked a little farther into my garden. I pulled weeds, I turned the soil. I could feel the life in the earth under my fingertips. Grace became my shadow. We cooked together, watched old movies together, tinkered with Samuel's old bicycle in the garage. She never mentioned her parents, and I never asked. There was an unspoken understanding between us. One afternoon in late fall, I was in the garden, trimming the last of the season's roses, when Grace brought the phone out to me. "Grandma, it's Dad." I looked at the screen. The name Kevin flashed there, a name that once meant the world to me and was now just a collection of strange letters. I could hear the worry in Grace's voice. "Do you want to talk to him?" I had said everything that needed to be said. My silence now had more power than any words I could speak. I handed the phone back to Grace. "No, sweetheart, that won't be necessary." I turned back to my roses. The snip of the pruning shears was sharp, clean, and final. I don't know what Grace told her father. I don't care. I had my answer to Lori's question. Why is she still alive? I am alive to tend my garden. I am alive to watch Grace grow into a fine young woman. I am alive to sit in Samuel's house and feel his presence in the afternoon sun. I am alive, quite simply, because I have a right to be. And no one, not even the son I brought into this world, could ever take that away from me.